Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. A big welcome to all of you. My name is Laura and I am delighted that you are joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I am joined by Michal and Joy from Orchestry, who will talk to you guys about real-world learnings from 1 million teams, groups, SharePoint sites and more. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESPC Community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC23. Tweet us at us and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our resource centre, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars and how-to videos. You can access and view the resource centre by visiting our website sharepointeurope.com and clicking the content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar. Take control of your Power Apps grid using the Customizer control with Diana Berkelbach. This webinar takes place on Thursday, November 9th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. ESPC is fast approaching. If you are looking for a vibrant Microsoft 365 and Azure conference that is jam-packed with groundbreaking insights, visionary keynotes, hands-on workshops, and exciting networking opportunities, then it is time to secure your late bird tickets for ESPC. But why should you attend ESPC? Well, you can receive valuable insights by attending a variety of session types across the biggest Microsoft 365 and Azure topics, catering from levels 100 through to 400. You can hear from Microsoft product team members, regional directors, MVPs, MCMs, and independent experts. ESPC is also a great way to build your professional network and to meet like-minded people from across the globe. Share and receive advice from fellow attendees, but also from our very friendly and helpful speakers. ESPC also helps you to keep up and get ahead with the latest product developments and practices that matter most. Find new and better ways of working to bring new energy and effectiveness to your work. And of course, as always, you can expect the latest news straight from Ignite. So invest in your team, invest in yourself, and invest in your career by learning new skills or mastering current ones at ESPC. Book now for the end of the month to avail of our late bird pricing and our special team discount. This is your last chance to save before tickets reach full price. And you can visit sharepointeurope.com/pricing to secure your tickets at these discounted rates. Now, in the age of hybrid work assignments, it is the perfect opportunity to reignite your team's enthusiasm, vitality, and creativity by embarking on a journey to the European Power Platform Conference at an incredibly discounted rate. Forge ahead together as a team by expanding your knowledge and strengthening your professional connections. Gain insights from renowned industry experts, community MVPs, and the individuals responsible for innovative products as they impart their world-class expertise. Engage in discussions with fellow attendees who share your interests, exchanging advice on how they approach similar projects, and exploring new opportunities as a unified team. Outside all the learning, you can enjoy networking breaks, the expo hall, expo drinks, demos, community area, prize giveaways, and much, much more. Book now to avail of this limited time 2-for-1 offer for the European Power Platform Conference, which is taking place in Brussels next June. So after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you might have into the questions window. And Joy and Michal have also kindly agreed to answer any questions as they come in real time. So don't forget to ask any questions that you might have. And again, as always, this webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to hand you over to today's webinar presenters. Hello to you both.
Hello. Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Great. So I'm going to find the share screen button.
Yeah, but it's back onto GoToWebinar, Joy. We haven't used this for a while. So Hello, everyone. Good morning, all the way from the west coast of the US here in Canada. And also, Joy, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it's after 8 a.m. now. So me and my coffee, we're great. We're good to go.
You're lucky. Well, we're super happy with everyone joining us today. We think this is going to be a fairly interesting session. I know it's something that Joy and I have been talking about, and I think we're in a bit of a unique position here at Orchestry, where instead of just looking at kind of trends across 1 or 2 or 10 customers, looking at real data and real trends in terms of usage of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and workspaces and everything else. So we really think this webinar is going to maybe open some eyes in terms of some of the trends that we are seeing. But again, we hope you're going to get some value out of it to understand, maybe what other organizations are doing. And again, some best practices and some common challenges that we see across lots and lots of different customers.
Absolutely. Excited to talk through the data. Michael, you're up first.
Hello. So my name is Michal Pisarek. I am one of the founders and the CEO and janitor here at Orchestry. Again, lots of experience with Microsoft 365 and with SharePoint in general. Really passionate, again, about just helping organizations make better use of the fantastic technology that Microsoft provides. And if you want to get in touch with me, lots of links there. Feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or X. That's the first time I've ever heard someone call it X, which was very, very impressive in the little introduction here. Or feel free to email me as well at michael@orchestry.com. We're more than happy. You'll find that Joy and I are very open in terms of sharing anything. So more than happy for you to get in contact with us if you have any questions. Enjoy.
100%. Yes. Wonderful to meet everyone. If we've never met before, wonderful to make your acquaintance. I am Joy Apple. I'm the Director of Customer and Partner Success at Orchestry, 3-time Microsoft MVP. And this is one of my passions, talking about Microsoft 365 and helping people get through the challenges and make things better. We spend so much time at work. It should be less difficult, not more. So thrilled to be here, excited when Michael started talking about this topic, excited to be able to talk through it because you're actually going to see and hear the things that we see day in and day out in the conversations we have with customers and help them through those pain points. So looking forward to it. All right. And just a little bit about Orchestry. We do believe that we do kind of help with Microsoft 365, making it tamed and transformed. And Michael, you are in Vancouver. So Orchestry is based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, correct?
Well, everyone's remote. So we're kind of, I guess, all over North America, basically, but lots of customers around the world, especially over there in Europe as well. But yeah, lots of customers pretty much all over the world, in Australia and obviously in the US and North America. But yeah, based out of Canada, originally founded here in 2020. And again, we call ourselves an adoption and a governance vendor. Really what we want to do is help you make better use of Microsoft 365, whether that's from a governance perspective, from an adoption perspective, from a lifecycle management perspective as well. Again, lots of different customers, really proud as well this summer to win a whole bunch of G2 awards as well, which is really, really great as well.
It was an exciting summer. All right, what are we going to talk about today, Michael?
All right, so let's talk about the session. This is a little bit different. And the reason that we wanted to do this is, we're in a pretty unique position, I guess, with Orchestry, having lots of different customers and being able to see some kind of broad level trends across customers, just to really tell you what we're really seeing. Now, we know it's only from 250 different kind of Microsoft 365 tenancies there, but it ranges from a whole bunch of different organizations from different sizes as well. Again, this is all kind of anonymized, aggregated, and non-identifiable data. Really, we use this data as well as our customers use, just really to help inform our decisions around how we can help customers, better leverage Microsoft 365. And we see, Joy, a lot of people, I guess, talk about their experiences, and which is great. But typically, I guess if you're working at a consulting company, you might be working with 5 or 10 customers a year. We work with literally hundreds. So that's why this kind of is a little bit more interesting. And I know as we've brought on additional customers, we really are starting to see some trends. And those trends we find are very interesting for people to understand. You know, where am I in my Microsoft 365 journey versus other customers? What are other customers in the same industry, for instance, doing, and how are they leveraging Microsoft 365 and Teams and SharePoint and everything else? Now, your experience might differ. It probably is going to differ, of course. We don't have access to every single customer on Earth. But again, we think this is going to be a really interesting session to see at least some of the broad level trends, some of the things that we're seeing ultimately, which might be tripping some customers up in Microsoft 365 or contributing to their success. And Joy, I know you work with our customers pretty closely, but there's definitely some common trends and patterns that we see that distinguish the customers that aren't doing so well versus the customers that are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I usually get to be the first one to see some of the dashboards as we're doing the onboarding. So this is going to be a fun conversation. So let's start with workspaces. So we've got some things we're going to talk about of workspaces, and then we're going to talk about guest management, just so you know where this conversation is going. So let's talk about these 4 data points around workspaces in Microsoft 365. And when we say workspace, that's kind of our generic term or phrase that we use. It involves or includes group connected SharePoint team sites, Teams, communication sites, and Viva engaged communities. So when we say workspace, we're talking about those modern experience collaboration objects. So the first one that we're going to hit on is workspace and activity. Now, as we go through, I believe we've said this already, feel free to put questions in chat. Our amazing moderators going to read those out. We'll be able to have conversations as we go through. We'll also have questions and answers at the end. But question, what percentage of workspaces have actively been used in the last 180 days? And this is usually the first thing we see, Michael, when we're on a call with a customer.
Correct. And when we talk about activity, it's a pretty broad level thing, but assume it to be any action within SharePoint, any action within Microsoft Teams, maybe an action within Planner as well. There's a range of different ways that we kind of track in activity within Orchestry Joy. We use some stuff from Microsoft. We also get some of our own custom stuff as well. But just so people think, what percentage of workspaces, so Teams, SharePoint sites, Viva engaged communities, communication sites, do you think have actively been used here in the last 180 days?
80 days. Let's see what our trend shows at Orchestry. All right.
Oh, very good animation by Rob there. Okay, so on average, we see from customers that really their average usage is about 33%. So only a third of everything that they create has been used in the last 6 months. Now, this might be shocking. I know it's pretty shocking to us, and it's definitely shocking to customers. They're like, oh my God, why do we have all this stuff that just hasn't been used here for potentially weeks, months, or in some cases, years or multi-years? But again, what we're seeing is that's a pretty common trend, and it tends to be a little bit higher for organizations that have a less or a smaller number of workspaces. It tends to be a little bit lower for organizations that are slightly larger and have a larger amount of workspaces. But really what we're seeing is the trends that we're seeing broadly across customers is people go, they create a team, a SharePoint site, a group, or whatever it is, they use it for a while, and then they just abandon it. Now, there's a couple of issues with that, which Joy is going to talk about in the next slide. But really, one of the big things that we see that is if you have all of this content and all of this data just kind of sitting there forever, you're going to get into some pretty significant challenges there going forward. So, Joy, why don't you talk about some of the issues that we're seeing, particularly around sprawl, because we know sprawl is kind of this huge thing that everyone talks about.
Yeah. And, you know, we've been talking about sprawl for, how old is SharePoint now? 21 years, 22 years? That's how long we've been talking about sprawl. And it's the age-old debate, is sprawl always bad? If it's being used, no. And we probably wouldn't call it sprawl if it were being used, because that would be content we're working on, we're referencing, and it's our living, breathing documentation. But when it's sprawl, when it's inactive, when it's things just sitting there, you're talking about just chewing through your storage. And we all know SharePoint storage ain't cheap. So we're increasing our cost of storage just to hold on to things that maybe are obsolete, irrelevant, should have been put to bed or archived ages ago, but there's not a process around that. And most of the time when we come into an environment, there's no process around that. So just think about it. If only 33% of our teams, our sites are being used and accessed, that means we have a lot of data out there that's irrelevant, that's just cluttering up our search experience. And how many times do we hear ourselves or our colleagues say, oh, search is just awful? Well, of course it is. We've got outdated, irrelevant content there, which means we're really lowering the confidence in our employee base of the quality of data that search is bringing back. So I'm going to flip over. This is the fun screen. So this is a screenshot from inside of Orchestry. This is the dashboard for workspaces. So what we would tend to say is an inactivity worst practice would be just let everyone do whatever they want, whenever they want, and don't worry about it. Let content live forever. It's fine. Everything's fine. We need to buy more storage. We'll just break out the credit card and charge it, right? We also see, unfortunately, I would say, Michael, this isn't super common, but occasionally we bump into a blanket no delete policy.
Yeah, we've seen this on quite a few customers, right? Where someone's like, well, we don't want to lose anything at any time. So what we're going to do is put a retention policy that we're going to retain everything essentially forever. Now, that's a really bad thing because you can't delete anything at all ever, which becomes a little bit of an issue. And obviously what happens is you just get this kind of creation of content all of the time. To let anyone do anything at any time. So the self-service provisioning thing, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, Joy, that we see most organizations have. We don't have too many stats around that, I guess, because we're obviously a provisioning tool. So when they bring in Orchestry, they turn off self-service. But the vast majority of customers do come to us because they have this sprawl, Joy, they have this duplication, they have 27 teams, all called marketing or some combination of like marketing there. And again, their inactivity is really, really high because people are creating things. You know, I create a team called marketing, Joy creates a team called marketing, someone else creates another team called marketing, we work on it together, we realize, well, actually we should have just one team, so then we all move to like Joy's team and we leave the other two there because of course no one's going to delete it or do anything like that as well. So again, this is a pretty bad thing. It's a really insidious problem. We hear about sprawl. It can really clutter up the experience for users as well, right? When no one knows what anything is. We're going to talk about naming as well because people are terrible at naming things. But again, it can be really, really difficult. And especially if you don't have any, not only provisioning process in place or a lifecycle process on the back end in terms of archiving or maybe deleting content, it can be a little bit of a problem. Now, by the way, we're very proud, as we've got here, this is our internal Orchestry instance. As you can tell, we've only got 125 workspaces. Of course, we're pretty small, but they're fairly active. And again, we use our tool, obviously, internally to kind of manage all of that content through there as well.
Yeah, and I brag on customers when we see their dashboard for the first time. If it's 50% or higher, I'm like, you're doing great. There's room for improvement, but good job. So
yeah,
let's talk about
this customer at 18%. I know they were challenged, one would say, yes, in terms of some of their pieces.
But those numbers are better these days. So
they are much better.
Shout out. So what are the best practices then? So we talked about the worst practices that we have seen in action, 18% active workspaces. So some of the things you can do is track that inactivity through the admin center. Use those reports that are available to you out of the box. See what's going on, see what people are using, find where content is not active, and start to have conversations about that. If you are one of those organizations with that blanket no delete policy on it, I guarantee you, your legal and compliance personnel are probably having nightmares at night over what could happen by keeping the wrong information too long. Have those conversations. Find out what should be retained and how long. Find out why are things not going away? Is it just because we've never had the conversation? Maybe people don't know. It's not uncommon. I actually had a call with a customer yesterday. We were just looking through lifecycle management for the first time, and they found a workspace called Personal. Personal what? Right? That's an adoption problem. Do you know you have OneDrive, which is your personal work storage? Oh, so you don't have to have that as a SharePoint site. I think it was actually a team, right? Or is it a life cycle problem? We don't know how to dispose of these things. We don't know what to put around it. Or is it retention regulations? So we need to have some conversations and create very different policies to address the different regulations that are in the environment. And you can absolutely utilize some of the out-of-the-box group expiration features that are part of Microsoft 365 to go in and retire that content. You see, we've got it on the screenshot. Enable expiration to these groups, right? After 180 days, it's there, it's available. The hard part is having the conversation with people, because we definitely, this should be on the worst practice slide, Michael. We definitely don't want a rumor to get out in the organization that says, IT is going to start deleting everything. No, right? Have the conversation. And then we teach people and we communicate about it.
Yeah, and just about if you have a lot of inactive workspaces, again, it might not be a bad thing. It might be how your organization works. That's fairly rare though, but you either have an adoption problem, so people are creating stuff and they're just abandoning it and they're not using it, or you have a life cycle problem, which means you actually don't have any way to clean up and retire and archive or delete your content, or you have retention regulations. And we do have some customers, especially in the legal space, that they have to keep everything in the education space. Typically, you have to keep things for 7 years or so. So again, you might want to look at some of those things. So inactivity typically isn't a good thing, but there are some other things around that as well. And again, as Joy said, consider using group expiration policies. It's free. You know, it's pretty simple. You can't really do much with it because the content either gets deleted or it stays there. So again, it's not the best, but it is available there for you. And again, lots of third-party tools to manage the team lifecycle. You can also try to teach your users how to archive teams, but I don't know, Joy, I don't think we've seen many people at all use that Teams archive function, especially not end users, because it's really difficult to understand where it is and what to do and what it does. So again, you're going to have to invest in some training also.
Absolutely. All right. Next data point, workspace customizations. We got a question and a reminder. Feel free to go to chat if you have any questions, or if you want to do a shout out for your best guess for what percentage of Microsoft Teams are customized in some way. And when we say customized, we mean with more than just the general channel, tabs, apps. I would even go so far to say that they've gone and paid some attention to that underlying SharePoint site, because that's still there, just begging to be used. So if anyone has any ideas, and we can't shout out now because we know the answer, percentage of Microsoft Teams that have been customized in some way, right? I'm going to go to the data. Here it is. Ooh.
This is so disappointing. This is so disappointing and kind of shocking, right? So I'll let you talk about this, but this to me always shocks me when we look at customers and what they're really using Teams at. Basically, they're creating a team, having all the conversations typically outside the channels and just bumping a couple of documents into the folder, and then that's it.
Or folders. And I talk a lot about business and IT relationships and conversations. And I get very passionate on this topic because we tend to roll our eyes at this point and go, users, they just don't understand. They don't know what they're Okay, but whose job is it to enable the users to understand what a channel is, when and how to use it? That's our job, right? Brenda's job, Frank's job, is to be the expert in their field, in their department. right? Our job is to enable Microsoft 365 in our organization. So when we look at this and we see, oh, less than 20% of teams and sites have been changed from the out of the box state, well, that's a sign that we need help with adoption across the organization. So let's look at some of the issues. The first one that hits us, where it hurts the most, we're paying for these things, but we're not using them, right? Shadow IT is rampant in many, many organizations, and we'll hit on that a few times throughout the conversation today. But it's rampant because people don't get it. Because again, Brenda and Frank, they're out doing their jobs, and they're somehow, some way, maybe you're writing a blog from IT for the organization, but somehow that's not getting to the users. They're not really grasping it. So it's time to step that up just a little bit. Oh my goodness, I get asked about this a lot. How do we get people to actually talk inside of the team channels instead of in one-on-one chat? That's so easy, because I just want to ask this quick question. Maybe that's a culture problem. Maybe I'm not comfortable asking this question in the whole team because I don't want to look stupid. So I'm just going to go to one-on-one chat with Michael and ask him. So maybe we need to change that culture, or highlight how useful it is if you have that conversation in the whole team in the correct channel. Now our content and our conversations are going to be organized together, and everybody's in the loop, right? We see people not utilizing the tabs and apps and teams, which means we're having to hop all over the place to get to the tools we need. And usually I would say in the last issue point, Teams is only used for meetings and chat. That seems to be the entry to Teams. Wouldn't you say, Michael? Have meetings.
Yeah, and it might be just the customers that come to us. Obviously, it's probably skewed here a little bit, but we definitely see a lot of organizations, and the only thing they're using Teams for is for meetings and chat. I mean, that's basically it. Maybe they're using it in a way to get into SharePoint through Teams, but they're definitely not using any of those capabilities that Teams provides. And again, there's some really simple things that you can do, right? Some really simple best practices, even just integrating third-party apps into a team. Or one way to get more conversations happening inside that team is to break it up into channels, because if you have every conversation in the general channel as well, that drives people crazy, because then they're trying to search for something and they can't find it within the general channel of that team either. So
you just reminded me of a worst practice.
Oh yeah, so definitely some issues there. But what are some of the best practices, Joy?
The worst practices is don't use team templates at all. Just let them figure it out, which means we see that floating IT team ghost there. Everything's going to live in that general channel, which, as Michael said, all conversations are going to happen there. I'll bet you in that general channel, there's a whole host of nested files or folders with all the files jumbled up there. Now it's really hard to organize my content and the conversation because it's just all in one big mess. But if we don't give guidance to users, right, it's law of 80-20, 80% don't know to click a button that says add a channel. And even if they did, for what? What does that mean? Again, using the default SharePoint homepage with no links, no additional lists or libraries, no custom columns, which means we're not leveraging metadata. And I kind of threw that's not how this works in here, because if we don't train our users and teach them how to do it, we'll come back and see what they did. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would you create a team called personal? Why would you bury everything this way? That's not how this works. But if we're doing the best we can, that's what they figured out. So some of I would add this too, the worst practice. When I was consulting, I had a really big customer. They disabled one-on-one chat and only let people chat in channels, which meant personal conversations were happening in Teams channels. So maybe don't do that.
It's definitely something that you don't want to do as well. So what are some best channels? Let me start off on some best practices here, Joy.
Joy and Michael, sorry, there's just a question in here. So someone is wondering, do you know how many percentage of people are creating team templates?
Ooh.
Percentage of organizations that are using Teams templates? I think that might be the question. So when they come to now, it's going to be very skewed here, the data set, because we're a Teams templating engine, right? I mean, that's one of the things that Orchestry does. So typically they're going to come to us because they want to implement Teams templates. But I think in general, even other customers, it's pretty low, which is really sad. So the out-of-the-box Teams templates, Joy, what would you say? I think it's a very low percentage of organizations that seem to be even aware that those things exist, let alone using them. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. The out-of-the-box Teams templates are pretty limited, to be honest with you. Microsoft does have the connected templates thing, but for instance, if you're adding things like apps and channels, they're not fully configured. They're these kind of placeholder pieces as well. So it's fairly low. I would probably say less than 20%, Joy, I think, of customers that come to us. Again, the data is probably skewed because they're coming to us to create templates for them. It's one of the things that Orchestry does, but it is very low. And funny enough, it is one of these best practices that we see. One thing that we do know here at Orchestry is it's very different someone going in and requesting a blank team and then you thinking that that person's going to go and kind of configure this team and add channels and SharePoint web parts and all of that sort of stuff. No one does that. I mean, it's a very low percentage. But at least if you can give them a template which has some sort of structure, which has some channels, which has some tabs, right? Maybe on the SharePoint site, you've also got a beautiful SharePoint kind of homepage, which is leveraging just out of the box web parts and some design. I can tell you that from our customers, their adoption of using some of these tools goes through the roof, right? And we've seen that, Joy, time and time again, where even something as simple as having a OneNote file pinned to the top of the general channel for meeting notes, something like that can be so powerful. So in terms of best practices, Joy, you maybe want to talk about this, but definitely some channels, a couple of SharePoint homepage web parts, right? And some other things that you've got on here as well.
Because we have the advantage of knowing in IT what these things do and how to do it. I would say this is going to go back to ITaaS, IT as a service. It can be some heavy lifting, but if you get in there and have some conversations with 5 stakeholders that represent some of the primary departments in your organization, how do you work? What do you do? What are some of the topics that you talk about as a department? If you can boil that down to 3, 4, 5 topics that span across it, those are your channels to build into a template. You talk about this thing, you work on this thing, you need a channel for it, and show them that that's actually a folder, right? So your content's going into a folder when you put it into a channel. You're going to get much better adoption. It's going to be easier for them to find things. Those conversations in teams are going to be much more cleaner, more organized. And you do really start to see that adoption take off. And you see fewer tickets to the help desk, and you have less friction when it comes to frustration in the user base. Thinking about putting on my consultant hat from before I joined Orchestry, I've been a consultant for years. I can think of only 1 or 2 times in the history of Teams that a customer came in and had Teams templates built out through the Teams interface. Microsoft talks about it, and you can find that information out there. But if IT is not leading that, the user base is so busy doing their 9-to-5 job, they're probably not picking up on it. All right. Anything else to add before we move on, Michael?
No, I mean, I think in general, like I said, if this idea of Teams templates or templates in general is something that's really powerful. And again, we've got some stuff that come out of the box with Orchestry. There's obviously a bunch of stuff that come out of the box with Microsoft. We just know that even giving people any starting point apart from a blank team is going to get you so much further from an adoption perspective. So focus on simple use cases that everyone's doing. Projects, departments, employee onboarding, for instance, are 3 of the main ones that we see. Even just giving templates around those particular use cases can really help drive adoption. And again, can really help people understand some of the capabilities of Teams and SharePoint.
And I think we take for granted what people don't know. It wasn't too long ago, I was on a call with our customer, and we had some members of IT on the call and some business analysts. and they had recently had a question from their user population about planner or project, or how can we have a consistent way to track tasks through Teams. And it was a brand new conversation. We all know Planner's been around for a little while, but it was net new information for their project management team. So being able to come in and have a get started template for Planner with the tasks and the buckets already there, ready for their project management teams just to go get started, was a pretty powerful win for the IT department. It went over really well. So just some food for thought there. All right.
Next one.
Ooh, workspace numbers. So we've been talking a lot about numbers today, but this is specifically the ratio of workspaces created per user. So this also has a flavor of self-service site and team creation to it. Good stuff. Here's the data.
All right, so this is an interesting one. Again, because this is a common question that we get in terms of, hey, we have 1,000 people in our organization, but we have 20,000 teams. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And what we're seeing is, again, there's not really one common trend. It really depends on the type and really the industry that you're in. But we see some kind of common things or kind of two data points. Obviously, the more users you have, the less that ratio is. So if you have 100 users, if we just look on the right-hand side here, up to about 100 users, the ratio is for every one user, we're creating about 1.2 teams. When we get to 100 to 1,000, at least the data we have, it's about 1 to 1.7. So typically, if you've got 500 users, some organizations, or the average, at least what we see, is about 850-ish. As you start getting more and more, again, when you move up to 1,000 to 5,000, it's like 1 to 1, and then it goes down pretty significantly after 5,000, where it's 1 to 0.3 and 1 to 0.3. So for 20,000 person organization, some of these organizations on average that we have within Orchestry have somewhere around 7,000 teams, SharePoint sites, groups, and all of that sort of stuff. Now, again, what we do see though is that some industries tend to have a higher ratio of teams or workspaces per user. And the reason for that is they're typically using teams and SharePoint sites and groups as part of a reoccurring process. So engineering is probably the main one. We've got lots of engineering customers, and the reason that their ratio is quite high is every time they do a project, or every time they do an inspection, or every time there's an incident, or every time they do some sort of business process, they tend to create a team with that and manage that process through them. So it's not a bad thing, it's just that the way they work makes things pretty high. The same with professional services. Professional services organizations typically run a lot of projects, they typically have a lot of customers. Most of the time they're creating a team per project or per customer, which again leads to a higher ratio. Legal and law firms is another one. Why? Typically, if you're a legal or a law firm, you're creating a team per matter or per case, again, managing on that as well. And construction as well. Construction in particular tends to be pretty high, at least when they work with us, because again, construction, if they're doing a site inspection, for instance, or if there's an incident, or if there's a new project, for instance, or even if there's an RFP response, we see that a lot with a lot of our customers. They're creating a team or a SharePoint site and basically managing that way. The other really big one is education as well. Again, we're just counting staff, we're not counting students because the student ratio is quite huge, but education is typically pretty big, that ratio. Again, the reason is that, you've got a teacher, you might be teaching 5 classes, so you're gonna have 5 teams, right, for each one of your classes through there. The biggest ratio that we've seen, and I'll be interested to hear maybe what people think on this call, is 1 to 37. So for every single user, they had 37 workspaces created. Now, this seems terrible, but it actually worked really well for them, and they had a really well-defined process. But basically, every time they did a project, every time they did an inspection, I think every time they did it was like a weekly inspection or a monthly inspection or something like that, they would create a team and run the process through there. So even though it was ridiculously high, again, it worked really, really well for them. I know we were shocked, Joy, when we looked at the numbers. I'm like, this can't be right, because the organization was quite small. It was only, I think, 300 people, but they had many, 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 many teams as well. So again, what the data tells us is some ratios are going to be higher by industry, for instance. We very rarely see it that it's less than 1-to-1 though, when you're over about 500 seats, right? You tend to get a lot of things created there.
I just did the math. Do you want to know our ratio?
What's our ratio? 4?
Our ratio
5?
is 6.9.
There we go. That makes
As
sense.
a small organization, but we have customer teams, we have partner teams, we have a lot of different things, plus our departmental. So as that breaks out, but makes sense, because again, the industry we're in kind of dictates that that's how we work. So, all right, I thought that was interesting. Let's talk about worst case workspace creation per user, or worst practices. Create everything as private, everything, all the time. Now this is tricky because we're talking about security. A good rule of thumb, and I started out in the defense industry. The good rule of thumb, when content's being created, workspaces are being created, ask the question, is it a breach of security if other people come into this team? If it's not a breach of security for the rest of your organization to see, I'm just going to make something random up, a marketing team, then maybe it's okay for that to be public. Remember, public is organization public, not World Wide Web public. That way there's some visibility into what's already been created, and you're reducing duplication of teams, sites, workspaces. Another worst practice is not to communicate at all any processes or procedures. Just let people figure it out and go create, again, whatever they want, whenever they want. Don't have any policies around duplicative, that's a hard word, naming. And we've seen this, we've got a little screenshot from our own little demo environment. But I think we had one customer that reported having 11 human resources teams. 11. Maybe it was one human resource team per region for the organization. But if they're all called human resources, and if I'm a member of HR and I have access to multiple versions of that, multiple human resources teams, when do I know for sure which one is which and what data goes where? And we're talking about HR data, that could be a really critical piece of information. That could be a problem that goes into the wrong place. And again, if we have no processes to delete our archive, then that's just going to keep stacking up. So those engineering processes, every time there's this inspection, that inspection, if we never delete it, that means I've got 10-year-old inspections that are just sitting out there. All right. What about anything you want to call out before I go to the best practices, Mike?
No, let's talk about some best practices for sure, yeah, because there's a lot of good stuff here.
So much good stuff. Have a process. Now, we're not saying locking it down so that nobody can do anything unless it goes through this very rigid thing. That could be dangerous if you lock it down. So engineering needs to be able to have an inspection team today, but it's a 48-hour SLA to be able to get it created through IT. That's a problem. But if you have a governed process and a process that can kind of check and make sure we're not duplicating things over and over and over again, that can be very, very powerful. We do want to make sure we're communicating that process so people know how to use it and what to expect. And again, we can reduce duplication by, when it's possible, when it makes sense, utilizing public teams inside of the organization. Make sure people understand when to create a channel versus when to create a whole net new team. In Orchestry, we utilize shared channels a lot. It's all internal. We don't have any B2B shared channels just because of the trust that's required between those. But we've significantly reduced the number of one-off teams we have to create by sharing a channel. So in my partner and customer success team, I've got a channel that's shared with engineering. So if there's a problem that somebody's having and I need to loop them in, I can mention the channel and they're there. They've penned that inside of their team. I've got it in my team and we work together in that one little channel. Beautiful. What do you think, Michael? We've probably saved at least 5 whole teams by using those shared channels.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then again, we're going back to our, oh, yes.
And the other thing you mentioned, yeah, is just archiving these things as well, right? So again, archiving or having a process around removing some of these old teams and old SharePoint sites and all of that sort of stuff. All right, let's talk about naming, Joy.
Favorite topics, it's workspace naming. This can be a hot topic internally. We have a lot of conversations around this.
So in terms of the data, we don't really have much because we don't know the names of the teams that people create for us. So this is more anecdotal. Anecdotally, people are really terrible at naming things, right? Terrible at naming folders, terrible at naming documents. They're particularly terrible at naming teams and SharePoint sites when they go and create things. And again, we find organizations really struggling with this to enact any sort of naming conventions as well. What we find, and I think it's pretty kind of general, you know, if you're expecting people to follow a naming convention and you've trained them 6 months ago and you think they're going to follow that, they're just not going to do it, right? So what happens is people want to create a team or a SharePoint site, all of these stuff that they've been trained with, it goes out the door and they just put in human resources. Then you get multiple teams called human resources or marketing or everything else. Again, the manual process doesn't really work. It's one of the reasons that people use third-party tools or Power Apps, or maybe they have some sort of form that they go through. The other thing that we also see with naming as well is there is a lot of duplicate naming, and there's a ton of teams and SharePoint sites with test or people's names in them. Because again, a lot of people either go and create a team or a SharePoint site called Michael's Test or Test Team or whatever else. We had one customer, I think they did a search for how many workspaces they had called Test, and it was like 480. And it was a bunch of random people just going in and creating these test teams or whatever else. So again, there's definitely things that we can do here though, Joy, right? From a naming kind of convention perspective. But what are some of the worst practices that we've seen?
No policies, really. Do nothing is the worst thing. But I'm going to follow that up by saying if you do implement a process, which is good, not getting any input or feedback from the people that are going to be stuck living with those naming conventions, that's bad. Find out what makes sense to people. This goes back to the old intranet navigation games we used to play, because IT would go create a navigation for the new SharePoint intranet and it made no sense to the business, right? So we want to make sure that it's going to make sense. We also want to make sure that we're not just putting numbers and acronyms in the names. What if you're the new guy that comes in and everything's named by an acronym? I don't know what that means. It's going to be really hard to figure things out. If you expect people to just know, it's not going to go well. If you expect people to just follow this process that's been dictated through a governance document that's 300 pages long, but there's no process to actually enable them to use that automatically, that's not going to last. It's going to be bad. Then IT's got to be the bad guy, say you're doing this wrong, and nobody likes that. We don't like to be the bad guy. And then if you do have, and there are PowerShell scripts that you can run to enforce some naming conventions automatically. If you do too many prefixes, notice we've got the screenshot here, it's too many, and then the name actually gets cut off. So we want to make sure we respect, what's the number, Michael, 36?
It's 36. So after 36 characters, regardless of how wide your screen is and how big you make the team's client, it starts to basically get cut off, as you see here. So some best practices are, if you are going to have prefixes, make the most important prefix the first thing that you have there, right? So for a lot of our customers, it might be PRJ, but if it's projects, maybe that project number or project ID is the first thing or the second thing that you have there as well.
And have the conversation, right? IT as a service, talk to people, find out what's going to make sense for your departments, for your organization. Communicate those policies, get feedback. I've got 2 screenshots here from a naming convention workbook that we created at Orchestry just to kind of help, because we see partners go into their customer organizations or direct customers. How do you get started? What are some ideas that we can propose to the business to help them make decisions? And so kind of having this spreadsheet, like what are alternative names? What are descriptions? What are some suggested abbreviations? That can really be valuable in helping drive the business to make some of those decisions, and then having a process to automate it. So we're not, as IT, having to go back saying, why didn't you use the naming convention? You did this wrong. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't read the 100-page document. I mean, it just helps. And we've got a screenshot here of kind of how this policy works inside of Orchestry to put those prefixes in place and a suffix. So we see what it is, we know the region it's for, we know what it is, and who it's for.
All right, my favorite topic, Joy, guests.
Love this conversation. Coming from a security background, yeah, this is a lot of fun. So, how are guests being managed? Michael, are guests being managed?
Yeah, again, it doesn't look great. I'm gonna be very interested to hear kind of what people think. But the whole guest thing, I think, in Microsoft 365 at the moment, again, at least from the customers that we see, is pretty concerning. I mean, that's the main word. It's quite open. The types of information you typically want to know about your guests are they active, right? Have they redeemed that stupid invite? That's the status thing. That's probably the first thing that people ask about for us when we put in Orchestry. And we've got a bunch of really powerful guest kind of reporting features. But who my guests are, when was the last time they logged in, what's their status? And the status is, are they active? Are they inactive? Or have they not redeemed that stupid invite? Because so many invites we find get sent out and they never get redeemed by guests. But that guest is, by the time that invite gets sent, they are already in your Azure AD. So that's why it's a little bit difficult. How many guests do people have, right? What are the different domains that they come from also? So what does the data tell us? So this is something that we know. So the average guest inactivity for the last 3 months we see is 47.75. It's about 50%. What we see is a couple of things. Most organizations, really their guest, I guess, process is we either allow them or we don't. That's basically it. That can cause some real significant issues for some organizations, and we see that. Now, this unique domains, this is actually real. This is actually from a customer. They had guests from over 2,165 different and unique domains. That's not even how many guests they had within the system. That's just all the different domains that they came from. And the reason that they had that as well is that whitelisting and blacklisting guests was just so cumbersome that they were just like, it's just much easier if we just allow all domains, and we'll deal with it later on as well through here. In terms of issues, right? We see this a lot. You have guests which basically have access, but they just are never active. So it could be an external link that you share to someone. It could be a guest that you invite maybe to a team at the group level, or maybe at the SharePoint level. And again, they log in once and they never log in again. But because there's no life cycle around that workspace or life cycle around that guest, they kind of sit there forever. The other piece, which is really concerning, is you can just add a guest with an email address, right? You don't really know any additional data about them, right? Their department, their job title, a lot of the times you might not even know their name, for instance, if that email is a little bit different as well. The other thing is guests from questionable domains. Hotmail, Gmail, I think people tend to know about this, Joy. They're like, no, we're not going to allow like Hotmail and Gmail and so forth. One of the things people don't realize is that they don't block things like competitors, right? And we see that a lot when we run the guest reporting within Orchestry for companies, where they're like, good God, why are all these competitors domains in here? Like, who invited these people? Who shared a piece of document in there as well? And of course, the other thing that exacerbates this issue is these shared links, right? If you share a link, that link's going to get sent to that guest. They have to redeem it. But again, that's going to be a guest within your Azure AD. And most, if not all of our customers, at least when they come to Orchestry, they don't have any life cycle around those guests either. So what are some worst practices, Joy, around guests?
I'll review guests, just bring them in. They stay there as long as the workspace is around, they're in that workspace, or as long as that document exists that we shared with them, right? It's just there forever. Not capturing identifiable information around guests. Like you said, I just need the email address. Well, who is butterfly12@hotmail.com? Don't know. I had a customer, their email address was their employee ID number at thecompany.com. Who is 137529? It's like the board or something. Don't know who that is. Allowing any and all domains. That could be okay, or that could be a little risky. But on the flip side of that, if you just go, okay, well, all this is hard, shut it down. No guests at all, ever. But what if my job is to work with vendors, customers? I need to now do that in a way that circumvents the security that is available through Microsoft 365. If we go outside of the environment, now I don't have data loss prevention, right? Now I can't see who has access to what if I just download content and email it to whoever I need to, right? So that's risky. And if we never clean up the guests that have never redeemed those invitations, again, it's a loophole, right? It's just an open risk that's sitting out there.
Yeah, we see, I think, we don't have exact numbers here. I would say 20 to 25% of all guest invites that go out are never redeemed, right? Which is really shocking because, again, then these people just sit in your Azure AD forever, cluttering things up here as well. So some best practices here, Joy. Let me go through these really quickly. So again, create some guest policies, right? Again, you can do that in Microsoft 365. You can block domains, you can allow domains, definitely go through some planning around that. One of the things that we also do as well as part of the Orchestry functionality, but you can do this manually as well, is kind of capture some meaningful information about guests. It's not really available out of the box, but capturing first name, last name, the company, the job title. The other big thing is the justification, right? So why is this guest actually being invited to this particular Green or to this particular team as well? And also have a guest review process. Now, there's multiple tools available in Microsoft 365 to do this. Again, you can use the new Microsoft Entra ID governance license, which is an additional license on top of your E3 or your E5. But again, that has some really nice access review settings, which can help you identify guests and get people to go through a guest review process. And again, that's one of the things that can be very, very powerful as well.
Perfect. And we've talked about a lot, but how do we get started? So we've put together some recommendations of how you might get started solving some of these pain points inside of your organization. Number one is talk to your business, right? They're the ones that are, the driving force behind most of this. What do they need? What regulations are out there that need to be followed? Find the numbers, pull the reports. There is reporting available out of the box in M365. Go find that. If you don't have access to a third-party tool, use those built-in reports, see what you can find out, and then build it. If you build it, they will likely use it, right? What are some templates that you can implement to fast track getting started? What are some policies that should be in place that you can put around your lifecycle management inside of M365? What are some naming conventions you could put in place? Should we have some processes in place for inviting guests into the environment? And then talk about it. Ask for pain points, ask for needs, create the processes, and then before you switch them on, prepare people, have the conversation, educate them so they're ready to step into that new governance world. Right. Ooh, we're at the wire, Michael, but yeah, we've got some couple of minutes here. If anyone has questions, those can go into chat. While you're doing that, I'll just click through our last 2 slides. All right, Michael.
Yeah, if you're interested in getting all of this information and much more, reach out to us. Again, we are a sponsor of ESPC. That's why we're here. But again, Orchestry comes with a fully functional 28-day free trial. You can get up and running in a few minutes. All of that data and more that we talked about is all going to be there. All the information about your guests, your workspace and activity, a whole bunch of other stuff as well through there. So if you are interested, even just go through the trial process to help you understand your organization, again, can be really, really beneficial. So reach out to myself or Joy, or go to the Orchestry website as well and just request a trial from there, and we can get you started and you can see all of this great data for yourself.
Perfect. And again, please, we would love it if you would follow Orchestry on LinkedIn and see, we even still say Twitter, X. Got to get into that new habit. But yeah, thank you so very much. We appreciate the time. And if you do have questions, please find us, reach out. We're always happy to help.
Thank you, Michael and Joy, for a wonderful presentation. There's some great insights there and some great tips and tricks. So we will get into the questions and answers part now. I see a couple of more questions have come in since the last question. So the first one in here is, what is the percentage of Viva implementations out there as of today, and is it really being used considering all the Viva apps there is?
Oh, good question. I mean, Viva's a broad suite of tools. Are you talking about Viva, not Viva Engage? What's the intranet one?
Connections.
Right, I don't know anything about Viva Engage. I assume you're talking about Viva Connections, not all of them. So in terms of Viva Connections, what would we say, Joy? 50% of our customers maybe have got Viva Connections deployed from an intranet perspective?
About that, and I would say on the Engage side, I think that's going to help drive it a little bit. That's ramping up. I think rebranding it and adding some additional capabilities has been a big thing. I would say if you're curious about it, I would encourage you to go and look at Microsoft's recommendation about modern collaboration architecture. Because if you're sick of every notification in Teams that's just always in your face, even if it's not stuff you need to know about, Viva Engage can really help with that notification management and putting the right content in the right place. But I would say it's definitely on an uptick right now, though we don't have numbers specifically around it. We're seeing more and more interest around it.
Yeah, one of the things I haven't seen much of, Joy, is Viva Topics. I haven't seen many of our customers, maybe a handful, have invested in Viva Topics, but definitely on Viva Engage from the Yammer side of things, that's being used in some customers. It's very binary. They either use it or they don't. There's no real kind of in between. But for Viva Connections, if that's the question around that, probably I would say 33% to 50% of customers have deployed Viva Connections, at least just to get their intranet into
Yes.
Microsoft Teams there.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, guys. So the next question then, someone is wondering, what do you think sticks more with customers in terms of intranet implementations, Viva customizations, or SharePoint customizations?
Good question.
Okay. Which sticks more, Viva? So I'm going to have to give you my consultant answer. It depends. So again, Viva is huge. If you get things like Viva Insights implemented and make it available to folks, you're going to see that sticking pretty well because it comes to us where we are in our inbox and gives us those recommendations, helps you follow up with tasks and things like that. That can be very powerful. From the SharePoint side of things, though, then you're looking at impacting people in their day-to-day work and their capability of being able to find the right thing at the right time. Since we're typically in SharePoint, even if it's via Teams, I would say that's going to be a longer term thing because it's going to be more consistent throughout the life of your intranet, whether that's your day-to-day collaboration in Teams or going to find that company public content that's on the intranet. But I think what makes this question so tricky is it's all beginning to merge into one thing, right? It's all intertwined so much. Michael, what do you think?
For me, it's Viva. I think, I'm not sure if I understood the question, but if it's what resonates more with customers, maybe from a sales perspective or talking to them, if you're talking about we're going to do a SharePoint intranet versus a Viva Connections intranet, I think it's Viva Connections at the moment. This is from someone who used to run an intranet in a box company. So I know this, I tend to think I know this space pretty well. I think it's Viva Connections. It's the sexy thing. It's what Microsoft's talking about. We know it's SharePoint in the back end, But I really think that Viva connection story is the only thing that Microsoft is pushing at the moment. So we hear that from a lot of our customers, Joy. They know it's SharePoint behind the scenes, but they talk about their Viva intranet or their Viva connections deployment as opposed to their SharePoint intranet deployment.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, guys. So there's just two more questions then. And the next one is, how big should a company be to have its own workspace admin that have it as its only job to work with adoption, building functional sites, making templates for SharePoint and Teams and all the governance, because most of IT does not do it?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. And sorry we went over time. I didn't think there was any questions. We would have stopped way earlier. How big does a company have to be? What do you think, Joy? I would say over 300. I would say over 300 seats. I mean, listen, being a Microsoft 365 admin, I think is a really, really difficult job at the moment. Like it's just extremely difficult because you're expected to know about compliance and about security and around workspace and around adoption, around all of that sort of stuff. So I really think for any customers which are over, I would say even 200 seats and are actively using Microsoft 365, you need to dedicate a full-time resource to that. It's just you're also looking for a unicorn person, right? That can do the admin and build workspaces and do training and talk to customers, right? And work out how in God's name to use Microsoft Defender or Intune, right? I mean, it's a very difficult role, but I think what we find, if you're particularly speaking about building workspaces and helping organizations adopt Microsoft 365, I would say it would be around the 200 to 300 seat mark, because then it's a pretty interesting financial thing. Say you've got 300 seats at E5, it's $50 a seat. You know, you're spending, what is it, 180 grand if I'm doing the maths correctly, around about for your M365 licensing. You can get so much more value if you have a full-time person in that role, making use of all of the money you're spending on licensing already. But what do you think, Joy?
One person can't do it all. Like you said, that would be an absolute unicorn that would have to work 24/7, because you are also talking about knowing the regulations, doing the change management, rolling things out, training, and doing all the technical things. And rarely do those personality types exist in the same body. But yet having someone that can run lead on that and have access to the admin, which is tricky too, having access to every admin center in M365. But yeah, we're not having to talk about massive enterprise organizations for there to be value in having at least someone whose full-time job is orchestrating all of that.
Yep.
Brilliant, guys. And just one last question then. So someone is asking, with such large data sets being generated from Teams, like chats and attachments, are organizations adopting to retention policies?
Depends on the industry that I would say. So in general, no, unless there's a law that mandates them to hold on to content. That's what I would say. So for instance, in the education space, in some countries, you have to hold on to stuff for 7 years, for instance. I know in law firms, it's fairly typical to hold on to things for, you know, a period of time as well. So they are holding on to that. And again, they are running into, you know, pretty significant challenges around storage. Most of our customers, though, if there's no real legal reason, they're typically not using retention. And I'll be honest with you, most of the customers, even if they're using retention, the only way they're implementing retention is we're just going to keep the stuff all the time. It's not like they're going to start purging it after 7 years. We do have a few customers which are much more advanced. But in general, no, we see retention only being applied in very specific use cases. Typically if it's mandated by law or the industry that they work with. So for instance, we have some healthcare customers, retention is everywhere because you can't leave any of that info. But apart from that, no. And yes, they do run into storage challenges pretty quick as well, because again, you can't delete anything, so your storage just keeps going up and up and up. There's ways to get around that, of course. Maybe they're moving that data somewhere or archiving in other ways also.
And that's usually where that conversation goes is, okay, so how can we keep it, but get it out of the way? right? Free up some storage, save some money there, respect the retention policies that need to be in place. But storage is killing us, and it's just so messy. How do we manage that? And a lot of times that's where that conversation starts.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, guys. So there two more questions came in there, but what I might do is we might wrap it up there as we are gone 10 minutes over time. So I will pass the questions on to yourself, Joy and Michael, and once you have your answers gathered, I will send the answers out in an email along with the webinar recordings to ensure that everyone gets their questions answered. How does that sound?
Perfect. Sorry, we didn't realize we would have finished way earlier. We apologize here, but yeah, no, get them to us. We'll get them answered for you. And again, reach out to us as well if you want to have a one-on-one chat. More than happy to make that happen.
Great. So that is the end of today's webinar. But on behalf of the ESPC community, I want to say thank you to both of you guys again for taking the time to carry out this webinar today. We really do appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You too. So thank you again to everyone for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again for more learning. Bye for now.
Bye.